r/NoSleep. Posted by u/sad, Rain 7064. I worked at a circus for one night, I will never go back there. I'm Alex, I have coulrophobia, which is basically a severe fear of clowns. I think this was triggered by my dad's favorite film IT, which he watched repeatedly when I was young. Most people laugh at my phobia, but I don't really pay much attention to them. I was 17 last summer, when school finished, and my family thought it was a good idea to get me a job at the local circus. Not just to tame down my fear of clowns, which my psychologist recommended, but to also help raise some money for my college funds. With a slight push, I agreed to the idea. However, this circus I worked at was not a regular circus. The day I started the job, I met my manager, who told me he appreciates me stepping up for the position because the last security person quit the job in just one day. He gave me his phone number in case I needed any assistance whatsoever. My job was basically to secure the circus at night and watch over the equipment, as there had been a few break-ins the last couple of weeks. The job didn't seem too difficult. At the surface, I just had to watch the cameras and do inspections every 30 minutes. It was 12 a.m. I got out of my car and went to the control room to meet the security person who only lasted a day on the job and I was going to replace. He handed me a handful of keys nicely organized and wished me good luck. He seemed a bit shaken. I responded, "Thanks, can you tell me where the control room is?" However, he didn't respond at all. I didn't pay much attention to this. I thought maybe he was just too tired and wanted to get home. After being lost while trying to find the control room, I noticed the circus was littered with food. Finally finding the control room, I set down my lunch, keys, and water near the computer display and got settled in my new job. It was 12:30 a.m. It was finally time to do my first inspection of the job. I gotta say, I was pretty nervous. After grabbing my keys and a flashlight, I got up and headed to the kitchen, the room closest to the control room. While inspecting the kitchen, looking for rats that the manager warned me about, I heard a sound coming from the meat freezer. A bit alarmed and curious, I went towards the freezer door, which felt so cold it could give you frostbite if you held onto it for more than 10 seconds. Opening the freezer, the stink of rotten flesh hit my nostrils so hard it made me want to barf immediately. I looked over to my right to see a pile of dead, rotting pig carcasses laid on the floor, forming a mountain. In front of me were about 10 dead pigs hanging from their feet down, attached to a meat cleaver about 2 feet off the ground. These were fresh, probably used for the food served to the visitants. Having studied in biology, I wondered why the chef or whoever was in charge of the storing of the food would put rotten food with fresh food. This was obviously a health hazard. Realizing I've spent too much time in this room and should probably go to the next one on my schedule, I made my way to the carnival rides. Which was the main reason the circus was still in business beside its top-rated comedy show. When I arrived at the storage room where all the rides were kept, something strange caught my eye. The rides were still there, but a particular ride caught my attention. It was a swing ride painted white. It was a simple ride, you simply put the seatbelt on and enjoyed the experience. I'm guessing it was made for smaller children. However, the swing was moving. It was moving back and forth like someone just got off it. A little spooked, I approached the ride, expecting a homeless person to be sleeping there using it as a hammock. There was blood. I painted my thumb with it and inspected it closer. It was definitely blood. Under the seat of the ride there was a severed finger. I jumped and quickly ran back to the control room. As I was running as fast as I could hear heavy steps running behind me. Too frightened to look back, I kept running until I reached the control room. I immediately shut the door behind me as hard as I could. My fingers still shaking, I spent about 3 minutes trying to see if I could hear something outside. I called my boss trying to get answers for this. After calling 2 times, he finally answered. He didn't speak for 10 seconds at first. I said, "Hello? Are you there?" Silence. "Yes," he responded with a monotone voice. I explained to him what had recently happened while I was doing the inspection. He didn't even say anything or try to question any of it, which I found very strange. After another 10 seconds of silence, he started laughing hysterically. It was a very distorted laugh. It even sounded like he was crying, not laughing. "Come out, come join us, don't make me come in there," he said. Then the call ended before I could even get a word in. All of a sudden, the door started banging like someone was banging a battering ram on it. I ran to the door handle, putting the chair under it to try to stop whatever was trying to come in. While also putting my weight on the door, I then heard the most chilling scream. It could be best described as someone getting all their nails ripped off at the same time while sitting in a tub filled to the brim with acid. This immediately sent a cold chill down my spine, so cold that I froze. Luckily the chair was still holding the door pretty good in place. Then it stopped. It died. The sound. The banging. The screaming. It all stopped. Snapping back from my mini paralysis I waited there all night. Until the morning, where I made sure the coast was clear using the cameras which captured most of the walls. I opened the door to the control room and made a dash to the front door. When I heard the footsteps again. The footsteps of something big and heavy running behind me. I made it to the glass front door and closed it for good. Now staring at the thing that chased and tormented me that night, it was pale, about 7 feet in height, had a long grin with sharp white teeth, it had long dark black hair and long fingernails. Not wanting to stare at this thing for 1 second more, I kept running to my car where I got in and saw it waving at me. I started the car and got the heck out of there. It's logical to say I will never go back there and will never ever work at a circus again. This sure as hell didn't tame my fear for clowns and didn't help one bit with money for my college. The next story of this video. Posted by you/alias, for whom it keeps killing, please just notice. When I was 19, I ended up living on the streets for some time. Even on the surface, that's a horrific situation, but there's so much more hiding underneath. My name is Michael, and I could go into the string of events that led to me being one of the panhandlers you pass by in the streets. The absentee father, the alcoholic mother, the fights, the foster homes, the halfway homes. But none of it really matters. Shit happens. Sometimes you push through, sometimes it floods over you. The shit, I guess. The fact is, I got to the point where I decided to try out the busy streets downtown. I remember my first day so clearly. The sun was blaring down on me, stinging my freshly bruising black eye. I wandered down the crowded streets, as people were running to bars and to the theater. It seemed like a good spot before, but there was just so much barraging my senses. The clacking of each footstep, the voices, the cars and horns. Most distinctly of all, I remember two things: a man laying on a grate, gripping a hat tightly to his head, heaving with uncontrollable sobs, and the screeching of rusty wheels, from a cart struggling against the pavement. I never saw the man again. I soon became acquainted with an old man named Elwin. He was a wiry gray man, with a thick beard surrounding a permanent smile. You may know of him, since he went viral a while back, when a couple gave him a free ticket to a Blue Jays game. I definitely wouldn't be around if it weren't for him. He taught me who and where to avoid, he shared whatever food he'd received and books he'd gathered, and he was always happy to just talk. Elwin seemed to know everyone. The woman by the church? Linda, taking care of her disabled older brother. The bigger man outside the Tim Hortons? Rick, in massive debt to some shady collectors. The lady on the subway platform? Crystal. Nobody knew anything about Crystal. Something about her filled me with such deep pity. Her bright red hair draped in messy tangles all around her squat body. Her face was always caked in thick makeup, smeared and uneven. I once saw her getting thrown out of a store after using their sample eyeshadow. The cashier was screaming at her in frustration, threatening to call the police if she came in again. Crystal hardly rose her eyes from the ground. She just stumbled down the steps and off to the subway, to once again go from person to person, mumbling incoherently in an attempt to get some spare change. It hurts to think about her. It hurts to think about any of them. I'll just get to the point. I had a nice setup in a tunnel under a bridge. The bridge provided safety from the weather, and the pillars and little walls provided some sense of privacy and, I guess, ownership. Once, a group of kids leapt over the divider between the road and the sidewalk while I was sleeping and landed right on top of me. Scared the hell out of both of us. And sure, the cars driving through were frustrating, and once in a while I heard that goddamn rusty cart wheeling back and forth somewhere down the way, but this was my home. I then let this one couple stay with me who were just passing through the city. They were desperate and said they'd lend me some pot in exchange. I should have seen the signs, such as all her bruises, or all his swastika tattoos. But I head off to a shit day, where I only got $3, not even enough for a decent meal, and came home to a wreck. All my food was gone, same with my knife, and my clothes and sleeping bag were drenched in piss. I was furious. I kept kicking the wall and screaming at people as they drove by. I wanted to find those two and make them pay. I wanted to find anyone and make them pay for where I was. But I sat down and managed to relax. My first thought was to crash with Elwin, but it was already late. I'd sleep somewhere else tonight, and then, in the morning, I'd clean up this mess somehow. I braced myself and went out into the cold night. By this time, it was early September and I was beginning to dread the night. I hadn't slept a night in the snow yet, and the very thought made me shudder. I wasn't heading towards a shining tomorrow. Things were only going to get worse from here. It was going to get colder, harder and more miserable. Thinking about it filled me with rage. Not the kicking and screaming kind, but the still, dull kind deep in your core. I sat down heavily on a bench. I found myself on a much quieter stretch of road, lined with run-down old industrial buildings and yellowing streetlights. I was shocked to realize how far I'd walked from my tunnel in the bustling downtown area. How long was I stomping through the streets on autopilot? What if this was a dangerous area? In my exhausted state, I didn't care. I lay down and closed my eyes, wrapping my arms around my chest for warmth. I remember waking up to that screeching sound again. The sound floated around in the distance most nights, but never this loud. I could hear metal rattling as the wheels jerked forward sporadically. I covered my ears in a daze, hoping to just ignore it, but it only got louder and louder, until I could feel the figure passing by my face. I slammed my fist on the bench and sat up. "Would you fuck right off, I'm trying to sleep?" The hunched-over bag lady stopped in her tracks. Her smell, the smell of rancid meat, was the first thing to register with me. I had to stop breathing for a moment. She was a miserable figure. Her black trench coat was like a rough, thick tarp, dragging across the muddy ground, picking up sticks and dead leaves. She was bent over at, practically, a 90-degree angle, leaning heavily on the small cart in front of her, which was stacked with an assortment of bottles and cans. I couldn't see her face at all, not because she was turned away, but because her greasy gray hair hung long in front of her, curling around her stash of grimy tin and plastic. These are all characteristics that you sometimes see in the streets. But there was something wrong. I didn't know what it was, but it made my blood run cold. She just stood there, inspecting me without looking, feeling me while still being feet away. Something about this figure paralyzed me, and all I could do was choke out a quiet sorry. The lady twitched in an unusual nodding motion. She kept walking. I realized my fingers and toes had gone numb. I wasn't sure if that was because of the cold. As the bag lady turned the corner into the small alleyway, I heard a quiet moan. Slightly familiar, more youthful than what could have come from her. Out of curiosity, or maybe out of a strange notion that I was just dreaming, I stood up. As quietly as possible, I began to make my way to the dark path. Another moan, more alert, a spike of panic. I moved faster and turned the corner. Crystal was stumbling to her feet while gripping the wall. She had a torn mattress slumped in the corner. The bag lady leaned on her cart, pushing it towards Crystal. Compounded with the crunch of glass and dirt, the shrieking of the wheels was physically nauseating. Crystal kicked at the cart. It was just a sick old lady. Why was Crystal panicking? Why was I? Crystal kicked the cart again, knocking it over with a crash. I tried to cry out for them to stop, but my voice got caught in my throat. The bag lady advanced, unaffected. This frail old figure, still at a right angle, she was still leaning on nothing. She only moved faster. Crystal mumbled in a panic, feebly slapping at the woman. The woman charged at her stomach, head first, pitting her against the wall. Crystal didn't scream. I don't think she could anymore. Her eyes widened in terror and pain as she gripped at the woman's back. She whimpered frantically. I wish I had done something. Then I heard the crunching and slurping. Then I saw the blood pooling on the ground around Crystal's flip-flops. Crystal knocked the greasy gray wig from the thing's head. I couldn't see its face, if it had one. It was buried too deep in Crystal's abdomen, twitching and lurching deeper and deeper. It was when it arced up into Crystal's chest, and her ribcage expanded and began to burst with multiple grotesque snaps that I threw up in my hands and down my shirt. This brought me back, and I finally ran. I ran and screamed and cried, covered in sweat and vomit. The rest of the night is a blur. I somehow made it back to my tunnel, surely horrifying many people along the way with my ravings and appearance. I just know I woke up the next day in my piss-covered sleeping bag. It took 4 months of hard work at random jobs and social assistance, but I'm no longer on the street. In that time more have disappeared. It could be for numerous reasons. All I know is that there were many days and nights where I'd hear the screech of those rusty wheels somewhere in the crowd. I still hear it. I've only ever told Elwin about that night. His eternal smile fell away, but he wasn't shocked. He just nodded slowly and said a prayer for Crystal. I asked how nobody has noticed that this thing is out there. He told me as far as anyone is concerned, Crystal has been dead a long, long time. I still visit Elwin quite a bit. I feel like it may be a way to keep him safe. So I guess that's all I'm asking you to do. Please, Just notice that these people exist. I've seen what can happen when they don't.